I didn't wake up famous. Or, I guess infamous, depending on who you ask. I mostly woke up to my phone ringing for the third time by 9 on a Sunday, which happens about as often as my landlord answering on the first call, which is to say never. The calls were all from Pauline, my friend from choir, and I figured she'd left her sheet music in my car again, so I ignored it and went back to slicing banana onto my cereal. The kind of little routine that makes Sunday feel different than Monday, even when they're basically the same. But here's what really happened. I walked out the door carrying a battered Tupperware of extra cookies I'd baked for the after-service crowd. Pauline's already parked half the lot away, waving both arms like she's signaling for a plane to land, and instead of "Good morning," she just blurts, "Have you seen what Brianna posted?" So, not the altos forgetting their parts. Different kind of crisis. Now, I know I'm supposed to start with that moment, that dramatic reveal. But honestly, that's not how any real story works. And for everyone who's about to judge me or defend me based on one grainy iPhone video, let's get something straight about who I am first. I'm Renee Carter, billing coordinator, aunt, full-time realist, and the person in our family who just barely keeps the lights on for more than one household. That's not a secret. It's not something to uncover. I live in a 2-bedroom that smells mostly like onions and lemon disinfectant. Not because that's a branding choice, but because onions and lemon are cheap and do the job. My car is an indestructible Honda that predates my last relationship, and if you ever borrowed sugar from me, you probably noticed the mug I use has a chip perfectly placed, so I always drink from the left side. What can I say? Old habits aren't all bad. Some are just survival. I'm not sitting on a pile of lottery tickets or forgotten inheritance money. My bank account looks like any middle-aged woman who skipped the avocado toast trend, and I carry grocery bags until they break just so I can skip 15 cents on plastic. The most luxurious thing I own is probably my library card. I know exactly how small and ordinary that sounds. Good. There's a kind of freedom in loving tiny, reliable rituals, like Sunday coupons and evening sitcoms, rather than chasing whatever trend topped Brianna's feed that week. Let me tell you something about frugality. It's not an aesthetic. It's not a flex. Saving money is boring, slow, and sometimes invisible to everyone but you. Nobody films themselves buying the dented can on purpose. The closest I ever get to content is a refrigerator whiteboard that says things like eggs and check furnace filter. If people want a story with a secret twist, this isn't it. But here's what the backstory always misses. For 15 years, I got pretty damn good at building a quiet skill set that nobody pays to see. I learned how to negotiate down a hospital bill, how to decipher a benefit statement, how to make every error in a spreadsheet stand up and show itself. None of it films well. Nobody clicks like on it. But I know for a fact it kept more than a few people in my family one scraped up step ahead of disaster. Brianna, my niece, is 22 now, and she's one of those people whose whole life slipped online like it was born there. She filmed her freshman dorm room and got 50 followers. Next thing I know, she's making videos about money hacks, getting shouted out by brands, her life edited into a highlight reel you can scroll through like a magazine that never stops printing. Of course I watched, subscribed to, though I never commented, because, well, what would I even say? Nice ring light? Her following blew up halfway through college. You could see it in the little ways. Fancier nails when she came home for visits, emails from management popping up in conversation the way other 20-year-olds mention a part-time job. When she hit senior year, she had real money coming in, more than I made, not that I asked, not that I needed to know. Her version of a successful life turned into gospel for a few million strangers who believed every caption she wrote underneath a 30-second clip. She never did anything cruel to my face, and I want that clear, right up front. If you're expecting a villain in this story, you're going to be a little bored by how polite we actually were to each other in real life the whole time. If you want to know why I pay Brianna's tuition every semester, on time, for 3 years straight, let's get into it properly, because it matters more than anything else in this story. My older sister, Diane, died at 51. It was sudden. Nobody expects their heart to just stop while cutting up string beans on a regular Tuesday. Definitely not Brianna, who was only 18 and about to start at a private university that handed her a thinned-down, generous scholarship. Real generous, except for that $18,000 extra per year nobody could just conjure up out of thin air. Diane's ex-husband, Brianna's father, had remarried and kind of vanished the day after the funeral, in the practical sense if not the literal one. He had 2 little kids in a different zip code by then, an entirely separate life with its own mortgage and its own school pickup schedule, and he gave his answer about tuition the way people say they're out of milk, flat, matter of fact, no real heat behind it. I can't. Maybe if he were cartoonishly evil it would be easier to talk about. But really he was just gone, missing, in the mathematical sense, the way a number disappears from one column and you're just supposed to accept the new total. The world doesn't pause for you to figure out tuition. It just ticks along, chewing through whatever's next while you're still trying to remember if you said everything that mattered to the person you lost. That whole summer, while I kept dialing Diane's old number just to hear her voicemail greeting one more time, the money situation kept scraping at me, low and constant, like a sound you can't quite locate in another room. I could have let it scrape right on through to nothing. People do that all the time, let a problem be somebody else's eventually, by default. Just by waiting long enough. But sometimes you see a problem only you can actually solve, and you just solve it, because the alternative is watching it happen to someone you love and calling that acceptance. So I pulled money from my own future. Literally stripped a loan out of the account that was supposed to be my retirement cushion. Dumb, maybe. Definitely not the kind of move any financial guru would sign off on if I'd called one of those radio shows. But the point wasn't logic. The point was momentum. Brianna needed the gap closed, and I closed it. I told her, right there at my Formica table, the same chipped mug between us that I still use today, a week before she packed up for school. I said I'd pay it, all of it, every single year, just for us. Just between us. But I had one request. Don't tell anyone. No drama with Dad's new wife. No undertow at Thanksgiving for the next decade. Just let it be quiet and private so she could build her own story without ever once having to answer for whose money actually got her there. She promised, and I believed her. Not because she was lying, but because loss makes people solemn, and people are never less sincere than when they're raw and freshly hurting and grateful for the first solid ground anyone's offered them in weeks. That first year, she really did remember. She sent text updates, got an A in chem, look at my dorm with the little string lights, the whole sweet, innocent routine of a kid, still close enough to the thing that saved her to feel it daily. By year 2, she started calling less, dropping things into the family group chat instead of texting me directly. By senior year, whenever tuition came up at all on her streams, it had quietly turned into scholarships and brand deals, a phrase she used so smoothly I don't even think she noticed she was rewriting her own history in real time. I don't think she lied. Exactly. I just think time makes the invisible fade clean out of focus, especially once your life keeps getting louder and louder around you every single year. I had asked for discretion. Privacy, though, has side effects nobody warns you about. Silence, it turns out, looks a whole lot like forgetting, from the inside and the outside both. I told myself I was fine with that. After all, if I'd wanted credit, I would have done it the noisy way, with hashtags and a heartfelt caption of my own. I chose quiet on purpose. I just hadn't fully accounted for what quiet eventually costs the person doing the choosing. So here's where it turned sideways. What I didn't see coming, truly never had an inkling of, for all my so-called wisdom about money and patience and playing a long game, was that the exact kind of life I'd fought to keep under the radar would eventually become some kind of warning sign in the public square. My little kitchen, my careful routine, all of it would end up a meme, a case study, a backdrop for content that looked inspirational unless you happened to have the whole outline sitting in your own memory. Brianna filmed that video on pure autopilot, as far as I can tell. She breezed in on a Saturday claiming she needed something from her old closet, dropped her bag on my couch, gave me a hug that felt completely real at the time. I made tea. She set up her phone the way she always did, so casually I just tuned it out the way you tune out a radio left on in another room. She chattered about something. I made a face when she suggested I needed to try oat milk. We went on about nothing much, the way you do after years of working comfortably around each other's sharp edges. Not 10 minutes later, apparently, she snapped a little behind-the-scenes clip. Showed my freezer stacked with casseroles, panned slowly over the coupon binder sitting open on the counter, made a soft joke about hidden savings that, on its own, sounded almost sweet. I remember her smiling while she filmed it, not mean smiling, just trying to get a laugh out of whoever would eventually watch. I didn't realize, and how could I, that this clip was headed for a whole series her fan base had lovingly nicknamed the Glow Up Family Audit. I never knew ordinary living could get rebranded like that, repackaged so cleanly that millions of strangers could turn my coupons and my chipped mug into punchlines, set against breezy captions about leveling up and outgrowing your roots. And I swear, right up to the moment Pauline shoved her phone in my hands in that church parking lot, freezing the frame on a shot of my own cabinets and asking, gently, "Are you okay?" I was. I genuinely was. But there's always that half beat right before you press play. The window where you can still believe your own story belongs to you and not to whoever happens to shout it loudest online that week. I stood there in the parking lot staring at the screen, at my own kitchen, the cheap overhead light, the stacked coupons. The whole thing turned into a backdrop for somebody else's point about her own glow up, and I hit on pause anyway. Because there's no version of that moment where you don't eventually have to look. The video had already crossed 3 million views by the time I actually sat down and watched it properly. That same evening, alone at my kitchen table, right where the whole thing had started a week earlier without my knowing it. Brianna walks through my apartment holding her phone down low, narrating in that warm, confident voice she clearly practiced into something close to effortless. The footage isn't flattering. There's my old car parked out front, my coupon binder open on the table, just the usual modest evidence of a life spent being careful, always making things last a little longer than they were maybe built to. "This is what happens," she says, smiling straight into the camera, "when you play it too safe your whole life." Then the footage cuts straight to her own place, bright and modern, full of glossy surfaces and products some company clearly paid her to be seen holding. You get the idea immediately. She never mentions, of course she doesn't, that the safe woman standing in those earlier shots had been covering her tuition for 3 straight years by then. I'll be honest, it hurt, and not only in the way you might expect. There was the usual sting of embarrassment, sure, the specific horror of seeing your own kitchen narrated back to you by someone who clearly thought she was being playful rather than cruel, but underneath that was something heavier. It felt like she'd taken something private and real, my careful, deliberate way of living, and squeezed it down into a joke for strangers who would never once hear the actual story behind it. She gave 3 million people a punchline and kept the truth entirely to herself, whether she meant to or not. What stung even more, honestly, had nothing to do with my hurt feelings at all. Over the following couple of weeks, something started happening to a part of my life that almost nobody in my family had ever bothered to ask me a single real question about. Here's the truth of it. For 15 years, whenever I could, I've run a tiny, unglamorous business helping ordinary families challenge unfair or downright fraudulent hospital bills. It started after watching my own family get buried under just about every billing trick in the book during Diane's last hospital stay, right when we were least equipped to fight back against any of it. I got good at it slowly, the way you get good at anything nobody else wants to do. Nobody grows up dreaming of reading medical bills line by line for a living, but we don't always get to choose which particular skill ends up mattering most. I never advertised it. I never tried to grow it into anything bigger or flashier. I liked the work itself, and I liked the small, sturdy life it quietly made possible underneath my regular hospital job. My clients, people who trusted me with some of the most stressful paperwork of their entire lives, never cared one bit about any of the rest of it. The apartment, the car, the coupon binder. They cared whether I could get a $4,000 billing error reduced to $400, and I usually could. But after Brianna's video took off, a handful of those very clients recognized me. They started reaching out, not angry exactly, not gossiping, just nervous in a quiet, honest way that was somehow worse than anger would have been. Would you trust your family's money to someone you just watched get roasted online for supposedly being bad with her own? That's the real damage sitting underneath everything else. It wasn't my ego on the line. It was 15 years of hard-won trust suddenly wobbling under the weight of a 30-second clip. And while all of that was unfolding, I happened to be up to my elbows in a completely unrelated billing nightmare for a different client entirely. Just regular work, business as usual. This particular case involved a young father whose son had been treated at a university health center. As I combed through their records line by line, the way I always do, I noticed something odd sitting quietly in the data. This university had been slipping extra charges onto thousands of students for services that should have been fully covered under their mandatory health fee. Not once or twice, either. Years of it, thousands of students, all quietly overcharged for things they'd never once thought to double-check. Guess whose university it turned out to be? That's right, Brianna's. I sat on that discovery for a few days, just thinking it over carefully. My first instinct wasn't revenge, not even close. Honestly, it was that same stubborn curiosity that had gotten me into this entire line of work in the first place. I spent a full weekend building out a complete billing audit, tracking down every charge, matching it against the school's actual fee structure line by line. It's the kind of digging that never once makes for a decent social media post. And buried in among thousands of records, there she was. Brianna's own account, overcharged by several $1,000s across her years there. Money she would never once have noticed losing if somebody hadn't bothered to actually look closely. I didn't post a single word online about any of it. I didn't call up the rest of the family to vent. I sat down at my own kitchen table and wrote a letter, the kind I've written for so many clients over the years, except this particular one, strangely enough, was for myself too. I sent it certified because I wanted to know for absolute certain that it actually reached her hands. Inside, I laid everything out plainly. Every single tuition payment I'd made on her behalf, complete with bank statements and exact dates, prepared exactly the way I'd prepare evidence for any client fighting a contested bill. Alongside that, I included a second document, a full professional audit of her own university health account, breaking down precisely where the overcharges had come from and exactly how to file for the refund she was rightfully owed. No charge, obviously. I wasn't about to bill my own niece. The letter itself was short. I told her I'd keep paying her tuition exactly as promised, straight through to graduation. I meant every word of that. You don't keep your word only when it happens to be easy, or only when somebody's behavior has earned it that particular week. And I explained, plainly, why I'd included the audit so she could see, in black and white, undeniable detail, the actual difference between someone who supposedly played it too safe her whole life and someone who had spent 15 quiet years building hard-won expertise nobody in her own family ever once thought to ask about. The same expertise, as it happened, that had just saved her several $1,000s she hadn't even known she was losing. It was almost 3 weeks before she got in touch. I won't pretend those weeks were easy. It's a particular kind of waiting, after you've said something honest and necessary and have absolutely no idea what, if anything, is coming back to you on the other end of it. What happened next wasn't really about me directly. Students at the university started talking among themselves. First, it was a small story in the campus paper, then a local news outlet picked it up, then it spread a little wider than that. Some of the sharper corners of the internet connected the dots fast. The viral niece, the billing scandal, the aunt who, it turned out, was a professional medical billing auditor by trade. Suddenly, Brianna's favorite contrast, cool niece, old-fashioned aunt, looked completely different, simply because the facts underneath it had quietly stopped lining up with the story she'd built. Eventually, she reached out. Not with some public apology video, not with any kind of filmed moment at all, just a long, genuinely uncomfortable private message, the kind that clearly takes real effort to write because it means swallowing your own pride one sentence at a time. She admitted she'd stopped thinking about the tuition payments ages ago, that they'd become an abstraction to her, the same way almost all her bills had. She told me that reading through the audit, seeing the years of quiet expertise sitting behind every single line of it, had made her feel genuine embarrassment for the first time in a long while, the kind that had nothing to do with her public image, and nothing to do with any number of likes. I didn't do anything dramatic in return. I just wrote back, thanked her for her honesty, reassured her about the tuition exactly as I had already promised, and told her I hoped, going forward, she'd think a little more carefully about the actual lives sitting behind the story she chose to broadcast for an audience. Most of the quiet ones aren't behind at all. They're simply not interested in being watched. I still live here, still drive the old car. Sunday mornings I still clip coupons exactly the way I always have, scissors and all, the same chipped mug at my elbow. My life is mostly unchanged, just the way I genuinely like it. The only real difference is that a few more clients have found their way to me since, people who heard, somewhere down the line, about an aunt who noticed something nobody else caught, simply by doing the same quiet, careful work she'd already been doing, same as always for 15 years before anybody thought to ask what she actually did all day,